Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. In this episode, we bring back an old guest with some exciting new news. Charles Lavoie, who was our 8th guest almost 2 years ago, has recently been named the new Director of Creative Labs at WPIC, which was a great opportunity to discuss the creative landscape when doing business in China. We asked Charles for his definition of creativity and why he believes it's important to maintain a certain amount of creativity in-house versus externalizing it to KOLs and KOCs to gain a long-term edge in the market. We discuss economic factors at play as well, discussing what a KOL might charge you for the creative and attention, and how brands can do better than market average ROI on that spend. We also discuss how to manage or teach creativity and how to deliver creativity through a consistent framework. Enjoy.
Where you can really get the edge, and you were making that parallel to that stock market, is trying to get an insight of which KOL or which content might be more interesting in the next year. So trying to make forecasts, and that's when creativity and brand insights becomes an added value. And that's what you kind of need to keep in-house. All the agencies and all the brands, if they're doing a good job at going to get the data, they can have all access to the same data. Now it's how you read that data and how you understand your consumers, and going back to that idea of relationship, how you can improve the content that they're doing to better serve your brand.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies.
Charles, welcome back to the show. It's good to have you on again.
Thanks, Todd. It's great to be here again.
The reason, listeners, dear listeners, is that I say welcome back again, because if you look deep back into the negotiation archives, you'll see that Charles was actually our 8th guest. And now we're sitting somewhere in the low 90s. So there's been a solid 85 episodes between the last time you were on and now. So for those who may not have caught, that first episode that you were on, that episode number 8, why don't you bring us up to speed again? Tell us a little bit about who you are and all your dealings, all your interactions, all your experience, and how it all plays out with China.
Absolutely. So I'm Charles. I'm from Quebec, Canada. That's where I grew up until more or less university. And that was my first interaction with China. I went, like a lot of people, I feel like the first interaction was with a semester abroad, which I kind of got hooked. I really got interested in everything that's happening, the innovation, the culture over there. And then that 4 months suddenly became close to 10 years China story. So after doing that, I worked a little bit at the Canadian Embassy on Trade Commissioner. And then I went entrepreneurship. I launched a alcohol brand in China, which I scaled for 5-6 years while joining a small creative agency. I was the third person on that creative agency, really focused on design, content production, and then brand strategy for China. And then that was really an interesting ride. We grew the agency from 3 to 40 people, back to 20, and then to 30. And then we went from serving 80% foreign clients into China to working more and more with Chinese brands. And that was more or less the story of when we last talked. And then the last 2 years, obviously, like everyone, COVID arrived. And then last year, I was out of China when COVID arrived. And then me and my wife got kind of blocked outside of China. And then finally, after a few months, made our way back to Canada. During that time, I kept my involvement with key accounts, an Italian wealth management fund that was expanding in China, a few other Canadian clients, helping them in China brand strategy. Also taking a few start up more tech branding projects here in Quebec. And about 2 weeks ago, I went on the other side to join the team at WPIC. So really thrilled about it, and I'm going to be focusing back on a lot of the interesting accounts that WPIC is serving to the Chinese market.
Yeah, congratulations on joining WPIC. That's amazing. Tell us a little bit about what your role is going to be now with the new team.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. There's a lot of work, a lot of elements which I'll be involved. My official role right now is Director of Creative Labs. So Creative Lab is something that we're launching in the next couple of weeks with WPIC. So over the last 15 years, WPIC has grew, becoming a really well-trusted partner from everything in terms of data into the Chinese market, in terms of e-commerce, very operational driven. And then last few years, there's been more and more demand from the brand partners to expand on the marketing side of how they can better not just sell on Tmall, but build their brand outside of the traditional e-commerce platform. So everything from social media management to also brand localization and local content creation. So my role is really to up the game and kind of trying to bring my input to the table and working with a lot of very, very talented Chinese creative planner, designers, copywriters to really take what the brands have in North America and Europe and adapt it the best we can to the Chinese market and maybe innovate on it.
So let's jump into a quick discussion, and I want you to set up more of the rest of this podcast by just how do you define creativity? I know it sounds like it's almost like how do you describe water, but how do you define creativity?
Yes, that's a very interesting concept because agencies tend to push a lot the word creativity. To me, it's really kind of bringing past or existing concepts or inspiration together, something that like two elements or more than two elements that already exist together to bring something new. That said, being creative is like in the tech world making an invention. There's a lot of inventions that are made that are not commercializable, like that you can't commercialize. So it's kind of the gap between invention and commercialization becomes innovation. And there's the same challenge in creativity. So obviously we can be creative as much as we can, but the big challenge is to be creative and relevant, to be creative that people care about and that actually helps the brand. And when it comes to cross-border marketing, the other kind of paradox here is that international brands want to find partners in China that are creative and can help their brand. But at the same time, a lot of them have the conversation, well, this is my brand framework and I don't want you to innovate. I want you to stay within that framework. And then in that sense, okay, how can you be creative when there's that much framework? And that's really kind of the big challenge of cross-border creativity. And that's where you're kind of looking at concept of the culture, and the ultimate goal is to try to convince that, okay, let's take what's existing, innovate. And I would say in cross-border brand building, you're not building a new brand. There's already so much elements existing. So that creativity you kind of want to add on. And then the ideal goal is there something that we can create and innovate that's going to inspire back the headquarter and that they're going to do something. And I've had experience in the past, and that's been, that's, I think, really, really challenging because the perception sometimes of working with agencies in China is just, it's a secondary market. They take our brand, just execute, use our creative assets, and then just adapt it, tweak it, but don't really innovate. Don't really be too creative. And then there's been really good case study of the innovations and the creativity that we were able to bring to China actually inspired the people in the headquarters. Oh, we should do that in our home market. And I think that's really what we want to deliver in terms of cross-border creativity, if we can inspire the people back home.
Well, if I remember correctly, a lot of some of the early successes that you were having, even with the alcohol brands, were, I would say, attributed to being very creative, which I think as a new brand, you have to be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody that is in the startup world understands that resources are limited, and the only way it's just the easy economic calculation. If you're trying to just compete by traditional media buying and getting the eyeball at the cost price, then you won't win because you don't have the budget. So you need to really find new angle, new ways. And I remember I had no experience in fashion, and we convinced Conrad Hotel or the Hilton Hotel in Beijing to do a fashion show around our vodka brand, and we got biggest Chinese media to come and a lot of KOL, a lot of celebrities for free, just because the concept was creative. So we became the creative powerhouse of the brand. And then that's when you start getting elements for free, or people want to collaborate with you at a discount. And that's when you get kind of eyeball and engagement and awareness and all those sales and metrics that you use at a discount.
So I think that's a good segue into one of the more polarizing questions that I have kind of teed up that I wanted to ask you, or talking points to talk about, because it's a bit of a discussion around maintaining creativity in-house versus externalizing or outsourcing creativity to, KOLs or the KOCs, whether it's up to 100% up to them to be able to do what they want versus how much you put the reins on them and try to, rein in where they're going and what they're doing with the brand and the creativity. Is it necessary? Is it, in your opinion, better to keep it in-house? And I know that part of your answer is probably going to be, well, it depends, but that's okay. Which is the best strategy that is necessary for brands to get a long-term edge?
My answer to that would become, again, like more of an economic answer in that sense. And when I say in-house, like let's say you work with a partner for the WPIC and they represent your brand in China. So for me, in that concept, that would still be in-house. But if you're outsourcing, like if creativity, let's say there's a human hour and there's a cost of creativity. And more KOLs and KOCs understand that. And basically, if you're paying them for their eyeball and what they can bring in terms of audience, and they will also charge you for creativity. So that said, if you're a brand, then you pay market price and you're just externalizing. So in that sense, the return on investment of that won't really be interesting for you, and you're just paying market value. So you're just paying what you get in return. So let's say the opposite scenario, that you have an element of creativity in-house. That's when, as I discussed, that's when maybe you become interesting for the KOL to work with, because you can offer them some value, which is creativity, as well as when you have that element of creativity, you can build your own channel, your own audience. So then it becomes kind of a trade-off. Okay, like I'm going to work with you. It becomes a negotiation. Well, I have this creative channel, which basically people follow. So if I collaborate with a KOL, then they're both exchange their audience. In that sense, it is necessary at some point for brand to start owning their audience. And the way they can own their audience is through creativity.
Some of the economic factors behind that, the KOL might charge you for the creativity, plus the eyeballs, plus the attention. Therefore, brands are really just getting market value, return on investment, would you say?
Yeah, in that sense. So it becomes a game of either finding KOLs that are undervaluing themselves, and that becomes again a negotiation, or at the same time, like making your brand exciting through creativity for people to want to collaborate with you and create traction in that sense, rather than just being, okay, here's a brief and then just do whatever you want. And also the second argument to that is more and more, and I think that's discussed, you see a lot of KOL videos which might be creative, they might bring short term, but they're just not on brand as we would use. So there's a lack of consistency, and then consistency is one of the key elements to building a brand. And then they're just shooting in too many arrows, and then at the end, it's benefiting the KOL. It might benefit short-term sales, but then there's always a compromise of short-term sales and building long-term margin and long-term audience.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like there might almost be like a marketplace play, or like just when you said where KOLs might be undervaluing themselves, so then I start to think like, oh, well, maybe there's so many KOLs and KOCs that, it's almost like a stock market, and you're looking for good stocks to buy that are depreciated or lower that you think they should be, and they have more value. So then those are the ones you're getting involved with. I mean, what would you recommend to brands to look for if they're looking for a KOL or a KOC and they want to get good ROI on that spend? What are you advising them to look for? What are your recommendations on some of, I don't know if there's data like attention data or the kind of audience demographics that they typically have? What are the things that you're telling them to go look for?
I think the first element for me would be like, obviously you have your brand values and your brand framework, rather than identifying many KOLs and trying out. Obviously there's that testing phase, but try to establish a relationship over the long term with kind of a key network. Relationship will allow you to have discounts over the years, over the time that you're working together. The second element is it will allow them to really understand your brand, understand your product, and go deeper than just kind of that one-off video. As this number of KOL are growing, a lot of people in China have, the more people I work with, the better it is, because they all have different audiences and they will help me reach more people. But I don't think it's like always a numbers game of reaching more people. I think it's about like a little bit building more loyalty with the right audiences. So I would say, key relationships, and then maintaining and then getting them really kind of to become some sort of a fan of your brand.
Are there any software or platforms out there that KOLs and KOCs kind of exist and live, where you can go and kind of choose, and they have almost like a LinkedIn profile or a CV or a resume style of kind of profile or persona, so that you can kind of mine through them and almost do this kind of like quick dating shopping, looking for KOLs or KOCs? You start to see a lot of these things coming up depending on what you want. I know that there are influencer platforms out there where brands can get connected to and reach micro influencers, and things like Cameo and some of these other sites. Is there stuff that exists like that, especially in China, where you can go through and they all kind of list themselves and you can find one?
Yeah, I think there are numerous platforms. What is it called? Parklu was one platform that was focused on beauty KOLs. They just got sold to international agency. I mean, Weibo and WeChat. I know Weibo for sure has its own agency where it manage and rank and create data and help brands select the right KOLs. So yeah, there are these tools that work, that are very quantitative. So I think it's like everything, it's having a good balance between the quantitative. Again, the quantitative often is going to tell you like what's happening now and how much is that KOL, like what have they done in the past, where you can really get the edge. And you were making that parallel to that stock market, is trying to get an insight of which KOL or which content might be more interesting in the next year. So trying to make forecasts. And that's when creativity and, brand insights becomes an added value. And that's what you kind of need to keep in-house, because you can, the data, all the agencies and all the brands, if they're doing a good job at going to get the data, they can have all access to the same data. Now it's how you read that data and how you understand like your consumers, and going back to that idea of relationship, how you can improve the content that they're doing to better serve your brand.
Speaking of creativity then, how does one teach creativity? And how do you manage that lesson, so to speak? I would say, like, are you approaching this from I need to educate, teach a brand? Or is this I need to educate and teach some people within the brand? And how do you, just generally speaking, how do you go about that?
That's a really tricky question. And there's always that discussion around right brain and left brain. And then there's people coming from the left brain, which you need to give them more framework, and people coming from the right brain, which you need to teach creativity. At the end of the day, like, I think what you're looking for is what inspire creativity is it can come from anywhere, like traveling, going outdoors, having conversation, just reading things online. And then when it can definitely be taught. I think it's more about like a process of connecting. So how to manage and teach creativity, I think it's really about creating good team units. So more and more creative agencies, and I think China is still a little bit behind, but we're installing that at WPIC is, designers were working in a box, and creative planner were working in a box, and the media planner and another box, and the copywriters in another box, and then kind of like taking elements of that brand and trying to give their inputs. And people with different personality might not have come together. So now like this idea of creative labs is really to create kind of strong units and trying to get a few people that are more left brain people, a few people that are more right brain people from different style, and then to just kind of like give them a whiteboard and get them to understand the brand, and then creativity will comes out of that mix and match. So that's very contrary to a lot of I would say traditional Chinese businesses or Asian business have been run in more kind of silo, and even in North America. So going away from that silo mentality to that more of lab unit, like multi-skills unit, basically working together.
How does the strategy and approach change from the West to the East? I'm imagining there are kind of strengths and weaknesses on both sides, but I also think that they're probably different, that the West has different strengths and weaknesses than they do in the East. So how do you adopt or change? And can you kind of point out to some glaring differences between if you were to do the same thing with a Western company or brand versus the one in the East?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's already been mentioned on the podcast, and there's this, like, I think anyone who's been working long enough in both world of the creative agency can tell you China is way stronger in everything that's tactical, and the West is stronger usually in everything that's strategic. So the way it means is like conversation in China with Chinese brands or Chinese marketing specialists will often start by the platform selection, the channel selection, the type of format we're going to use. And then after that, we're like, okay, this is a channel. Let's come up with an idea that would fit within that channel, which is for a lot of like Western brand leaders is a little bit counterintuitive. That has benefits in the sense that see how much innovation there's been in channel marketing channels in China versus the West. That's incredible. And I think it's a little bit interrelated in terms of like people are looking more at the problems and solution factors with existing channels. When I talk about channels like social media, e-commerce platforms, while in the West, there's been maybe more innovation in terms of pure brand strategy and brand messaging and saying, okay, we're going to go in that green segment. We're going to go in that ethical statement. We're going to go in those like more strategic kind of like diversity elements and stuff like that are more strategic topic. And then the channels are just more traditional. TV is still big here. And then there's like Facebook, Instagram, Google, but there hasn't been much channel innovation. So it's that contrast between strategic talk and then go to tactical versus tactical and go to strategic. And I think you need to take a little bit of both to really make the best campaigns possible.
How far can you really push the envelope on being creative? And actually in which end? I mean, can you push the envelope of creativity more in America or maybe Europe or, in Asia? How well received is getting a little crazy?
Depends how you take that word crazy. I think that the limits are different. I think the cultural sensitivity are much higher in North America and in Europe, in the sense that like you really got to be careful about where you go, and people are going to call you out. And if you try to be funny, you have to be consistently funny, and then it needs to be done the right way. While in China, it's obviously like more the political framework, but as soon as you're under the radar, I think people are really welcoming of just brands that try left, right, and center, and then come back, and then just are a little bit less consistent over the style, and then they just find this. And I don't know if I would call this creativity, but like they can be definitely more go into more direction. And then we've seen it in really crazy or creative brand partnerships. And I think that was also on one of your other podcasts where like ice cream brands have partnered with, fashion brands, and car brands have partnered with industries that you wouldn't really think about in the West, or like people wouldn't dare to even imagine going there, just because I think the brand manager are a little bit less flexible in North America and Europe.
Yeah. And I remember, thinking back to Chloe Gonsalves' episode, just talking about makeup and the cosmetics industry. And I think one of the leading KOLs for women's cosmetics is a male. And he tries on all the makeup and does all the time and things like that. And I keep thinking, if that was in America, I wonder how well that would go over. I don't know if they're as accepting in some realms, but then, are much more accepting in others. So it's really interesting, but I think it really kind of draws back to kind of a bit of a KYA, like a know your audience, and know the landscape that you're getting into. I want to talk a little bit also about brand consistency. Okay, so delivering creativity through, a consistent framework. How do you help brands do that?
I think that's tied to the questions and the discussion we were having before. And one thing that struck me when I came back to North America, I've seen so many brand people talk about brands must be authentic. And this authenticity is really strong buzzword right now in the marketing world. From my perspective, we love a lot of brands that are not authentic, I would say. Let's say the Red Bull Give You Wings campaign. And that's just been like extremely consistent into a hyper fantasy world. And Red Bull, like there's nothing really authentic about the brand of Red Bull. They've just been consistent at creating that universe, and people start believing it, and people now consider them as authentic. Same thing with like Kylie Cosmetic, I would say. It's not really about authenticity. It's just really consistent with the same key visuals and over and over repeating the same message that people like. And that's, so I think that the key brand is not to be like authentic, not to be necessarily connected to real down to earth topic. Is really like, you can be either go into fantasy world and create your own universe. And I think a lot of Chinese brands are really good at this, but they're just very consistent and into their fantasy world.
How influential to your work or the decisions that brands might make around creativity? How influential is maybe a bad word, but how important or how relevant is the sheer amount of competition in China, and just how noisy it is? How many other brands are there competing, both locally and foreign? How important is that when you're starting to take into account in guiding a brand through a creativity process?
Extremely important. The first step of the process that we establish for brand coming to China is brand focus. Focus in terms of audience and focus in terms of message. So a lot of brands, that now are ready to go to China have been building their brands in North America and Europe for 5, 10, 100 years. And then now they have a long list of brand assets. They have a long list of product assets. And then they just go into China with all these assets and try to communicate the same way. And then basically what we try to do is, okay, remember 100 years ago when you started your brand, you probably started with, one product and one clear brand value, and then just kind of went into that focus. Let's kind of try to do that for the new market, obviously with the resources that you have now, and maybe not going all the way extreme to the only one product, but having that focus. So selecting that brand asset and that target audience to start somewhere, establish a conversation, get people to know you for that, and then kind of introduce other products and introduce other brand assets. So I think that's really a key to success in a crowded market, is to have an extremely sharp focus.
Okay. Open-ended question to finish this off. Any last pieces of advice or thoughts to consider for brands and for our audience when thinking about their creativity, whether it's in advertising or package design, as they're looking across the pond to go towards Asia?
I want to say be open-minded. I just feel like that's a little bit cheesy in the sense, but it's more like try to give a framework, but not like, don't give a word and a color and an image and be like, this has to be it. Just give, as we use in the world, like a creative direction, and try to work with quality local people and give them some sort of, an elastic to be able to play within. So set the rules, but don't set them too tight. And maybe instead of taking the lead in the conversation, just ask questions, provide the right resources, and then, let people, if you try to take too much part of the conversation, like the innovation, the creativity will kind of be suffocating on the other side. So let that creativity, and then it's better to say no than, not receive any additional inputs.
Charles, thanks so much for coming on the show today. It was really, really great to have you back again on the show, and congratulations on the new role.
Thank you so much, Dud. And I'm looking forward to listening to many more podcasts, and hope I didn't repeat myself too much. It was a pleasure.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands just like yours enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co. And be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 再见.